The architecture of power, sculpting the human arm. The human upper limb is a marvel of biological engineering, a complex lever system capable of immense force yet requiring meticulous calibration. For the uninitiated, the metamorphosis from atrophy to athleticism is not forged through heavy iron, but through mastering the fundamental laws of tension and stability. We are deconstructing the kinetic chain, stripping away the ego to reveal the raw biomechanics of growth. This is the definitive dossier on forging steel from bone, beginning with the foundational bodyweight maneuver that establishes the baseline for all upper body strength.
The knee push-up, the biomechanical regression, and the genesis of pushing power. To understand the knee push-up is to understand the fundamental physics of the human machine, stripped of ego and re-engineered for structural integrity. In the vast, often intimidating lexicon of strength training, few movements are as misunderstood, maligned, or critically undervalued as the knee push-up. Often dismissed in the vernacular of the gym-goer as a modified or pejoratively a girl push-up, this movement is in reality a sophisticated regression tool that allows the novice central nervous system to map the complex motor patterns required for upper body pressing without the catastrophic failure associated with excessive load. It is the genesis point. It is where the neurological blueprints for the triceps, the anterior deltoids, and the pectoralis major are drawn. To bypass this step in favor of a sloppy full-body push-up is to build a skyscraper on a foundation of sand. Inevitably, the structure will collapse under the weight of poor form and compensatory patterns. The physics of the knee push-up relies on the immutable laws of leverage. In a standard push-up, the body acts as a second-class lever, where the fulcrum is the toes, the load is the body's center of mass, and the effort is applied through the hands. By shifting the fulcrum from the toes to the knees, the length of the resistance arm is significantly shortened. Biomechanical studies indicate that a standard push-up forces the upper body to lift approximately 64 to 70% of total body weight. By regressing the fulcrum to the knees, that load is reduced to approximately 49 to 54%. This reduction is not a concession to weakness, it is a calculated calibration. For the beginner whose connective tissues, the tendons and ligaments of the elbow and shoulder, are not yet tensile enough to withstand high-load repetition, this reduction allows for the cultivation of volume. It permits the trainee to perform enough repetitions to stimulate hypertrophy, muscle growth, and synaptic facilitation, motor learning, without the risk of the supraspinatus grinding against the acromion process, a common injury in fatigued poor-form push-ups. We must examine the anatomy of the movement with forensic precision. The primary movers here are the triceps brachii, specifically the medial and lateral heads, which are responsible for elbow extension. For a beginner seeking arm exercises,
the push-up is often categorized as a chest exercise, but this is a reductionist view. The push-up is a traveling plank that requires the triceps to act as the primary engines of elevation. When the fulcrum is shortened in the knee push-up, the beginner can focus entirely on the mind-muscle connection of the triceps. They can feel the contraction at the top of the movement, the lockout, which is purely a function of arm strength. Furthermore, the anterior deltoid, the front of the shoulder, acts as a crucial synergist. In untrained individuals, the shoulder girdle is often unstable. The knee push-up provides a safe environment to train the rotator cuff muscles to stabilize the humeral head within the glenoid fossa while under a manageable load. However, the efficacy of the knee push-up is entirely dependent on the eradication of the tabletop error. A pervasive failure in beginner technique involves keeping the hips high, creating a 90-degree angle at the hips, effectively turning the movement into a weird partial shoulder press that accomplishes nothing. The true knee push-up requires a straight line of rigid tension from the knees through the hips to the crown of the head. The glutes must be clenched with vice-like intensity. This brings us to the concept of the hollow body position borrowed from gymnastics. Even though the legs are shortened, the core must remain engaged to prevent lumbar hyperextension, swaying of the back. When the glutes are squeezed and the pelvis is tucked, the abdominal wall braces, creating a solid platform from which the arms can push. Without this core stiffness, force bleeds out of the midsection like water from a cracked vessel, and the arms are left to struggle in isolation rather than working as part of a unified kinetic chain. The descent is where the magic of muscle tearing and rebuilding occurs. This is the eccentric phase. Gravity is the adversary here, and the beginner must learn to yield to it slowly. A rapid drop negates the tension. The trainee must lower themselves with a tempo, perhaps 2 to 3 seconds down, actively resisting the floor. As the chest approaches the ground, the elbows must not flare out to the sides in a T-shape. This is a cardinal sin of biomechanics that places immense shearing force on the shoulder capsule. Instead, the elbow should track back at a 45-degree angle, forming an arrow shape with the torso.
This tucking of the elbows biases the load heavily onto the triceps and protects the shoulder joint, making it a superior arm builder. The hand should be screwing into the floor, right hand clockwise, left hand counterclockwise, creating external rotation torque that stabilizes the shoulder blades and prevents them from winging off the ribcage. Historically, the push-up in all its forms traces its lineage back to the dans of Indian wrestlers and the calisthenics of ancient armies. It is a primal movement pattern, the ability to push oneself away from the earth. The knee push-up, specifically, represents the democratization of this power. In the mid-20th century, as physical culture began to permeate the general populace beyond the military and athletic elite, the need for regressions became apparent. However, for decades, it was marred by gendered language, ladies' push-ups, which did a disservice to the physiology of the movement. Modern strength and conditioning coaches have worked tirelessly to rebrand this as the kneeling push-up or lever push-up, emphasizing its utility for rehabilitation, warm-ups for elites, and foundational strength for novices of all genders. It is a tool of universal utility. The transition from the bottom of the movement back to the top, the concentric haze, is where the beginner develops explosive power. The instruction is not merely to lift the body, but to push the earth away. This psychological shift recruits high-threshold motor units. As the arms straighten, the triceps contract violently. For the beginner, this is likely the first time these muscles are being asked to move a significant percentage of body weight. The burn felt in the back of the arm is the accumulation of hydrogen ions, a byproduct of anaerobic glycolysis. This metabolic stress is a key driver of muscle adaptation. The body realizes that its current arm strength is insufficient for survival against gravity and initiates the cascade of hormonal and cellular repair processes that result in thicker, stronger muscle fibers. We must also consider the role of the serratus anterior, the boxer's muscle, located on the ribcage. At the top of the knee push-up, the trainee should actively push the floor away to protract the shoulder blades, spreading them apart. This final inch of movement is often missed, yet it is vital for shoulder health. A weak serratus anterior leads to scapular winging and shoulder impingement.
By mastering the scapular movement in the kneeling position, the beginner bulletproofs their shoulders for the heavier lifts to come. The knee push-up is therefore not just a muscle builder, it is a diagnostic tool. It reveals asymmetries in strength, is one arm pushing harder than the other, deficits in core stability, and lack of mobility in the wrists. Speaking of wrists, the knee push-up offers a gentle introduction to wrist extension under load. The modern human spends their life with wrists in neutral or flexed positions, typing, texting. Placing the hands flat on the floor requires 90 degrees of extension, which can be painful for the unconditioned. The reduced load of the knee push-up allows the connective tissue in the carpal tunnel and the forearm flexors to adapt gradually, thickening and strengthening without the acute trauma that a full plank or push-up might cause. This prepares the beginner for the subsequent exercises in our dossier, creating a foundation of structural tolerance. Ultimately, the knee push-up is a study in humility and precision. It forces the beginner to accept their current physiological reality and work within it to expand their capacity. It teaches the discipline of form over ego. When executed with the rigorous attention to detail described here, glutes firing, core braced, elbows tucked, tempo controlled, scapulae moving freely, it ceases to be a regression and becomes a formidable exercise in its own right. It transforms the arms from passive appendages into pistons of power, readying the system for the rigors of the full plank, the dip, and the heavy press. It is the first step on the path to physical mastery, a testament to the philosophy that true strength is built not by lifting the heaviest weight possible, but by mastering the body's relationship with gravity.
2. The basic plank, the architecture of static stability and isometric endurance. If the knee push-up is the engine of motion, the plank is the anchor of stability. To the unobservant eye, the plank appears to be an act of doing nothing, a static hover above the floor. But beneath the surface of this stillness lies a chaotic symphony of neuromuscular firing, a war of attrition between the human will and the relentless pull of gravity. In the context of arm exercises for beginners, the inclusion of the plank might seem anomalous. It is famously a core exercise. However, to categorize it solely as such is to misunderstand the biomechanics of the upper limb. The plank, particularly the high plank, top of a push-up position, is a premier method for developing isometric arm strength, shoulder girdle stability, and wrist resilience. It is the foundational isometric hold upon which all dynamic upper body movement relies. You cannot fire a cannon from a canoe. The plank builds the battleship. The scientific principle at play here is proximal stability for distal mobility. This axiom dictates that for the distal segments of the body, the arms and hands, to move effectively and exert force, the proximal segments, the spine and shoulder girdle, must be rigidly stable. The plank is the crucible in which this stability is forged. When a beginner holds a plank, their arms are not moving, but they are working furiously. The triceps must maintain extension against the collapsing force of gravity. The deltoids are under constant tension to keep the torso elevated. This is isometric training, muscle contraction without a change in muscle length. Isometrics are scientifically proven to recruit up to 10% more muscle fibers than dynamic contractions because they eliminate the momentum factor. For a beginner with weak arms, the plank teaches the nervous system how to maintain high tension output in the triceps and shoulders for extended durations, building the muscular endurance necessary for repetitive lifting. Let us dissect the anatomy of the high plank, the variation most relevant to arm development. The trainee assumes a position with hands directly under the shoulders, fingers spread wide to distribute force. The arms are straight, pillars of bone and muscle supporting the cathedral of the body. In this position, the triceps are the primary stabilizers of the elbow joint. They are locked in a battle to prevent the joint from buckling. Simultaneously,
The biceps are engaged in co-contraction to micromanage the elbow's position, preventing hyperextension. This co-contraction is vital for joint health and teaches the antagonistic muscle pairs of the arm to work in concert. Higher up the chain, the rotator cuff muscles, the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, and subscapularis are screaming. They are working to keep the head of the humerus centered in the socket. For a beginner, simply holding this position for 30 seconds provides a stimulus to the shoulder stabilizers that rivals complex machine work. But the plank is a systemic exercise, and its impact on the arms is inextricably checking the integrity of the core. The core here is not just the rectus abdominis, the six-pack muscle, but the transverse abdominis, TVA. The TVA is the body's natural weight belt, a deep layer of muscle that wraps around the spine. In a proper plank, the trainee must actively pull the belly button toward the spine, engaging the TVA. This increases intra-abdominal pressure, turning the torso into a rigid cylinder. Why does this matter for the arms? Because force transfer leaks through a soft core. If the spine sags, the shoulders roll forward, changing the angle of the glenohumeral joint and placing the arms in a mechanically disadvantageous position. A tight core allows the arms to sit in their strongest anatomical position, maximizing the efficacy of the hold. The history of the plank is a journey through the evolution of physical culture. All isometric holds have been part of yoga, kumbhakasana, and martial arts, iron shirt conditioning for millennia. The modern obsession with the plank is relatively recent. For decades, the sit-up and the crunch were the monarchs of abdominal training. It wasn't until the late 20th and early 21st centuries, spearheaded by researchers like Dr. Stuart McGill, a professor of spine biomechanics, that the tide turned. McGill's research demonstrated that repetitive spinal flexion, crunches, could damage the lumbar discs. He championed anti-movement exercises, anti-extension, anti-rotation, as the true function of the core. The plank is the ultimate anti-extension exercise. It trains the body to resist being bent backward by gravity. This shift in sports science revolutionized training, moving the focus from isolating abs to integrating the kinetic chain, placing the plank at the center of functional fitness. For the beginner,
The mental component of the plank is as grueling as the physical. Isometrics introduce a unique psychological stressor, time dilation. 10 seconds in a plank feels like a minute feels like an hour. This is where the discipline of the arm comes into play. As the seconds tick by, the arms begin to shake. This neurogenic tremor is the nervous system searching for fresh motor units as the primary ones fatigue. It is a sign of deep structural work. The beginner must learn to breathe through the shaking, diaphragmatic breathing that expands the ribs laterally without losing abdominal tension. This control under duress is directly transferable to exercises like the dumbbell curl or the farmer's carry. It teaches the arms to remain steady when the body is under stress. We must also address the wrist health aspect of the high plank. In the digital age, wrists are often the weakest link in the chain. The high plank places a compressive load through the carpal bones. According to Wolff's law, bone adapts to the loads it is placed under. The controlled compression of a plank stimulates osteogenesis, bone growth, in the wrists and forearms, increasing bone density. Furthermore, the connective tissues of the wrist are stretched and strengthened. For beginners who find push-ups painful due to wrist discomfort, the plank serves as a graded exposure therapy, allowing them to build tolerance to wrist extension in a static environment before adding the dynamic impact of push-ups. Variations of the plank allow for progressive overload. Once the basic high plank is mastered, the beginner can introduce instability to further tax the arms. The shoulder tap plank involves lifting one hand to tap the opposite shoulder while keeping the hips square. This momentarily forces one arm to support the entire body weight, doubling the load and demanding extreme anti-rotation strength from the core and shoulder. This is arguably one of the most effective bodyweight arm exercises in existence, as it mimics the single arm loading found in athletics. Another variation, the forearm plank, shifts the focus slightly. While it takes the wrists out of the equation, useful if injury is present, it changes the leverage on the shoulders, requiring intense latissimus dorsi engagement to keep the elbows from sliding forward. However, the plank is not without its pitfalls. The sway back is the enemy of progress. When the abdominal muscles fatigue, the pelvis tilts anteriorly,
and the lumbar spine arches. This shifts the load from the muscles to the facet joints of the spine, causing pain and negating the exercise's benefits. Conversely, piking the hips too high disengages the cord and turns the move into a resting pose. The goal is a perfect line. To achieve this, the beginner must engage the quadriceps, thigh muscles, pulling the kneecaps up. This locks the legs and creates a posterior chain reaction that feeds into the glutes and core. The body becomes a single fused unit. In the grand scheme of arm training, the plank is the silence that gives meaning to the noise of movement. It creates the structural integrity required to wield heavy dumbbells. It teaches the shoulder blades to lie flat against the ribs, providing a stable base for the humerus to rotate. It builds the mental fortitude to endure the burn of lactic acid. It is the architectural foundation of the upper body. Without the stability forged in the fires of the isometric plank, the arms are merely cosmetic appendages, lacking the true functional strength to manipulate the world. The plank ensures that when the beginner picks up a weight, their body is a fortress, ready to transmit force with efficiency and power. It is the ultimate preparation, the stillness before the storm of growth.
3. Light hand grippers, the neurological ignition and the anatomy of the crush. In the hierarchy of physical development, the hand is often relegated to the status of a mere hook, a passive coupling device that connects the body to the barbell.
This is a catastrophic oversight. The hand is the primary interface between the human will and the physical universe. It is the evolutionary masterpiece that separated our ancestors from the arboreal apes, the instrument of tool creation, combat, and construction. When we speak of light hand grippers for the beginner, we are not discussing a trivial desk toy or a stress relief gadget. We are discussing the initiation of the crush, a fundamental human capacity that correlates directly with central nervous system efficiency, shoulder stability, and, according to extensive longitudinal studies, overall longevity. The hand gripper is the gateway to the kinetic chain, the spark plug that ignites the upper body's potential for force production. To understand the efficacy of the hand gripper, one must first perform a forensic dissection of the forearm. The hand itself contains very few muscles of significant size. It is a marionette, controlled by the strings, tendons, that run through the carpal tunnel and attach to the powerful engines located in the forearm. The primary movers here are the flexor digitorum profundus and the flexor digitorum superficialis. These muscles are dense, fibrous, and designed for endurance. However, for the unconditioned beginner, they are often dormant, accustomed only to the light, repetitive tasks of typing or swiping on glass screens. The modern world has engineered the need for grip strength out of daily existence. We no longer wring wet clothes, carry heavy pails of water, or wield axes. Consequently, the modern beginner's forearm is an atrophied landscape. The light hand gripper acts as a rehabilitation tool for this evolutionary neglect. The mechanics of the torsion spring hand gripper are deceptively simple yet biomechanically profound. Unlike a barbell, which provides a constant resistance, gravity, a torsion spring offers linear progressive resistance. As the handle is squeezed closer to the close, the resistance increases. This mimics the biological reality of muscle contraction. As the muscle shortens, it becomes weaker, active insufficiency, yet the gripper demands more force.
This forces the beginner to recruit the high-threshold motor units, the fast-twitch fibers capable of explosive power, right at the moment of peak contraction. For a beginner using a light gripper, typically rated between 60 to 100 pounds of pressure, this allows for high-volume repetition without the risk of avulsion fractures or tendinitis that plagues those who jump immediately to captain of crush-level grippers. The neurological implication of gripping cannot be overstated. We must discuss Sherrington's law of irradiation. This physiological principle states that a muscle working hard recruits the neighboring muscles, and if they are already part of the action, it amplifies their strength. Make a fist. Now make a tighter fist. You will feel your forearm engage. Squeeze as if your life depended on it, and you will feel your triceps, biceps, shoulder, and even your pectorals fire. This is irradiation. By training with hand grippers, the beginner is not just building a firm handshake, they are teaching their central nervous system to turn on the entire arm. A strong grip is the neurological signal for the shoulder to stabilize. This is why rotator cuff rehabilitation often involves gripping exercises. The brain perceives a strong grip as a high-load situation and reflexively armors the shoulder joint to protect it. Therefore, the hand gripper is effectively a shoulder stabilizer in disguise. Historically, the cultivation of grip strength was the hallmark of the old-time strongman. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, legends like Thomas Inch and Hermann Gorner possessed hands that could crush potatoes or bend coins. They understood that strength leaks from the hands. If the grip fails, the lift fails. The modern resurgence of grip trainings, often siloed in niche grip sport communities, has brought the science of the gripper back to the forefront. For the beginner, the goal is not to bend frying pans, but to build connective integrity. The tendons of the hand and wrist adapt much slower than muscle tissue. Muscles are vascular, they receive a rich blood supply and heal quickly. Tendons are avascular, they feed through osmosis and adapt over months and years. Light grippers used for high repetitions, 15 to 20 reps, pump nutrient-rich blood into the forearm compartment, bathing these connective tissues in the fluids required for thickening and strengthening. There is also a vital distinction to be made between the types of grip.
The hand gripper specifically trains crushing grip. This is distinct from pinching grip, holding a weight plate, or supporting grip, hanging from a bar. Crushing grip is the dynamic ability to close the hand against resistance. It targets the extrinsic flexors of the forearm, but also relies heavily on the intrinsic muscles of the hand, the thenar and hypothenar eminence, the fleshy pads at the base of the thumb and pinky. In beginners, these muscles are often underdeveloped. Regular use of light grippers results in a visible thickening of the hand itself, transforming it from a fragile appendage into a durable claw. However, technique is paramount. A common error is the half rep. Beginners often squeeze the gripper halfway and release. The magic lies in the final millimeter, the click of the handles touching. This is the range of motion where the muscle is fully shortened and the neurological demand is highest. To achieve this with a light gripper, the beginner must learn the set. This involves using the non-working hand to position the gripper correctly in the palm, ensuring the dogleg, the static handle, is anchored against the meat of the thumb and the fingers are wrapped optimally around the moving handle. This prevents the gripper from sliding and tearing the skin, a painful lesson in friction physics.
The cultural and psychological dimensions of the grip are equally fascinating. The handshake remains the universal symbol of trust and character in Western society. A limp fish handshake is visceral, often eliciting an unconscious negative bias. Conversely, a firm, controlled grip signals vitality and confidence. In the medical community, grip strength is now recognized as a clinical biomarker of aging. Studies published in major medical journals have shown a robust correlation between low grip strength and increased risk of cardiovascular disease, stroke, and all-cause mortality. It is a proxy for overall neuromuscular health. By training with grippers, the beginner is essentially hacking their own longevity metrics, signaling to the body to maintain muscle mass and neural drive. Furthermore, we must address the concept of balance. The hand is designed to open and close. Hand grippers train the closing mechanism. If a beginner exclusively uses grippers without training the extensors, the muscles that open the hand, we risk developing imbalances that can lead to carpal tunnel syndrome or lateral epicondylitis, tennis elbow.
Thus, the use of grippers must be approached with an understanding of the antagonist muscles. The light nature of the gripper for beginners is a safety valve. It allows for the conditioning of the flexors without overwhelming the extensors. It is a harmonious introduction to tension. In the future landscape of fitness, as we move further into a touchscreen-dominated existence, the hand gripper will likely gain status not just as an exercise tool, but as a therapeutic necessity. We are seeing a rise in tech neck and gamer's thumb. The dynamic, pumping action of the gripper acts as a localized pump for the lymphatic system in the arms, helping to clear waste products and reduce inflammation caused by repetitive strain. For the beginner, the light hand gripper is the most portable, efficient, and scientifically sound method to reawaken the dormant power of the forearms. It is the pocket-sized gymnasium that prepares the hands for the rigors of the barbell, the pull-up bar, and the demands of life itself. It turns the hand into a vice, ensuring that when the beginner grabs an opportunity, or a dumbbell, they have the physical capacity to never let go.
4. Light dumbbell curls, the iconography of aesthetics and the biomechanics of supination. If the grip is the functional interface, the bicep curl is the cultural monolith. No other exercise in the pantheon of physical training carries the same symbolic weight. It is the universal gesture of strength. Ask a child to make a muscle, and they will instinctively flex their arm, showcasing the biceps brachii. However, beneath the layer of vanity and gym bro stereotypes lies a sophisticated, anatomically complex movement that is essential for the beginner. The light dumbbell curl is not merely about inflating the ego, it is about mastering the art of isolation, understanding the supination function of the forearm, and safely loading the elbow hinge without the compensatory momentum that plagues heavier lifting. It is the study of the lever in its purest form. The anatomy of the bicep is a trinity of tissue that the beginner must understand to visualize the movement. The biceps brachii is a two-headed muscle, long head and short head, that originates at the scapula and inserts into the radius bone of the forearm. Its function is foldful, flexion of the elbow, bringing the hand to the shoulder, and crucially supination of the forearm, turning the palm upward. Sitting beneath the biceps is the brachialis, a deep muscle that generates pure flexion power. It is the workhorse of the elbow. Then there is the brachioradialis, the large muscle on the top of the forearm. A well-executed dumbbell curl stimulates all three, but only if the mechanics are precise. Why light dumbbells? The ego is the enemy of the bicep. In gyms across the world, one can observe the swinging phenomenon, trainees heaving heavy weights using their hips, lower back, and anterior deltoids, reducing the bicep to a mere stabilizer in a momentum-based movement. This is dangerous and inefficient. For the beginner, a lightweight, perhaps 10 to 15 pounds, forces strict adherence to biomechanical truth. It eliminates the ability to cheat. It isolates the target muscle. This isolation is critical for developing the mind-muscle connection, a neurological pathway where the brain learns to consciously contract a specific muscle group without recruiting neighbors. The movement mechanics of the dumbbell curl are a masterclass in class 3 levers. The elbow acts as the fulcrum, the bicep insertion is the effort, and the dumbbell is the load.
The physics dictates that the muscle is under maximum mechanical tension when the forearm is parallel to the floor, a 90-degree angle. This is the sticking point. A beginner using lightweights can pause at this point of maximum disadvantage, feeling the tension and learning to overcome it with pure muscular contraction rather than inertia. This deliberate tempo, 2 seconds up, a 1-second squeeze, 3 seconds down, is the secret to hypertrophy, muscle growth. The eccentric phase, lowering the weight, causes the most microtrauma to the muscle fibers, which is the stimulus for repair and growth. Gravity wants to pull the weight down quickly. The bicep must fight to lower it slowly. The defining feature of the dumbbell curl, as opposed to a barbell curl, is the freedom of rotation. This brings us to the concept of supination. Because the biceps tendon wraps around the radius bone, the bicep functions as a powerful supinator. Think of the motion of driving a corkscrew or turning a doorknob. To fully shorten and contract the bicep, the palm must face upward. With a dumbbell, the beginner can start with the palms facing the body, neutral grip, at the bottom, and as they curl up, twist the wrist so the pinky finger turns toward the ceiling. This twisting motion activates the muscle fibers that a fixed bar cannot reach. It is the difference between a good contraction and a complete one. We must also explore the historical lineage of the dumbbell. The term originates from Tudor England, where athletes would train by swinging heavy church bells with the clappers removed, hence dumb, silent, bells. Over centuries, this evolved into the handheld weights we know today. The dumbbell curl became the staple of the golden era of bodybuilding in the 1970s, popularized by figures like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who treated the curl not as a lift, but as an art form. He visualized his biceps as mountains growing. While this may sound hyperbolic to a beginner, the visualization technique is rooted in sports psychology. Focusing intent on the muscle increases neural drive. The safety profile of the light dumbbell curl is superior to almost any other arm exercise for the novice. The elbow is a hinge joint designed primarily for one plane of motion. However, it is susceptible to tendinitis, golfer's elbow, medial epicondylitis, or tennis elbow, lateral epicondylitis, if overloaded before the tendons have thickened.
Heavy barbell curls lock the wrists into a fixed position, which can place valgus stress on the elbows if the lifter's natural carrying angle doesn't match the bar. Dumbbells allow the wrist to rotate naturally, accommodating the individual's unique skeletal structure. This makes the light dumbbell curl an orthopedically friendly exercise, preserving joint health while building muscle. Furthermore, the dumbbell curl exposes and corrects asymmetries. Almost every human being has a dominant side. A right-handed beginner will likely have a stronger right bicep. If they use a barbell, the dominant arm will unknowingly take 60% of the load, leaving the weaker arm to lag forever. Dumbbells force each arm to carry its own burden. The left arm cannot borrow strength from the right. This unilateral training ensures balanced development, which is vital not just for aesthetics, but for preventing injuries in the back and shoulders caused by muscular imbalances. The physiological response to the curl is unique. It produces a profound pump, the cellular swelling caused by blood pooling in the muscle. While often dismissed as cosmetic, the pump has a physiological purpose. The pressure of the swelling stretches the fascia, the sheath surrounding the muscle, and triggers anabolic signaling pathways. For a beginner, this immediate visual and sensory feedback is psychologically addictive in the positive sense. It provides tangible proof of work. In a world of delayed gratification, the bicep pump is instant. This motivates the beginner to return to the gym. We must also address the variations available within this single movement. The hammer curl, where the palms remain neutral, facing each other, shifts the emphasis from the biceps brachii to the brachialis and brachioradialis. This builds the width of the arm. The incline curl, performed while lying back on a bench, places the shoulder in extension, stretching the long head of the bicep and creating a longer range of motion. For the beginner, however, the standing or seated basic curl is the bread and butter. It teaches the foundational skill of keeping the elbows pinned to the sides, a virtual fulcrum, preventing them from drifting forward or backward. In the grand narrative of fitness, the light dumbbell curl is the beginner's first lesson in isolation. It teaches that strength is not always about moving the heaviest object from A to B. Sometimes it is about tension, control,
and the internal sensation of the muscle working. It is a meditative, rhythmic movement. When performed with the strict form advocated here, no swinging, full supination, controlled eccentric, it transforms from a vanity movement into a rigorous exercise in discipline. It builds the peaks that fill a t-shirt, yes, but more importantly, it builds the functional pulling strength required for rows, chin-ups, and the daily tasks of lifting and carrying. It is the classic, the standard, the indispensable tool in the arm-building arsenal.
5. Bench tricep dips, the geometry of bodyweight mastery and the shoulder paradox. To comprehend the full magnitude of the bench tricep dip, one must first confront a statistical reality of human anatomy that often eludes the beginner. The triceps brachii comprises approximately 2/3 of the upper arm's total muscle mass. While the biceps garner the glory of the flex, it is the triceps that provide the substance, the girth, and the pressing power. The bench dip, a closed kinetic chain exercise, serves as the beginner's entry point into the world of heavy pressing, a rudimentary yet profoundly effective manipulation of leverage that turns the body itself into the resistance. It is a movement that predates the modern gymnasium, a relic of calisthenics traditions where the environment, a park bench, a low wall, a sturdy chair, became the apparatus of transformation. However, beneath its seeming simplicity lies a minefield of biomechanical nuance. The bench dip is simultaneously one of the most accessible exercises for the novice and one of the most contentious within the sports medicine community. To master it is to thread the needle between rapid hypertrophy and potential orthopedic peril. The anatomy engaged during the bench dip is a study in synergistic pushing. The primary target is the triceps brachii, specifically the lateral and medial heads, which are responsible for the final phase of elbow extension. The long head of the tricep, which crosses the shoulder joint, plays a secondary role here, as the position of the arms behind the torso places it in a state of active insufficiency. It is shortened at the shoulder, making it less effective at the elbow. Consequently, the bench dip is a mass builder for the horseshoe look of the outer arm. But the tricep does not work in a vacuum. The anterior deltoid, front shoulder, and the clavicular head of the pectoralis major are recruited heavily to stabilize the shoulder girdle and assist in the upward drive. This makes the dip a compound movement, a multi-joint symphony that triggers a greater hormonal response, release of testosterone and growth hormone, than single-joint isolation movements like the kickback. The setup is the first critical juncture where the beginner succeeds or fails. The trainee positions themselves facing away from a bench or stable elevated surface, hands gripping the edge shoulder width apart. The fingers must face forward. This is non-negotiable.
Turning the hands outward or backward places extreme torque on the wrist flexors and the elbow collateral ligaments, inviting injury. The legs are extended forward, bent at the knees for the absolute novice to reduce the lever arm, or straight out to increase the load. The heels dig into the floor, acting as the pivot point. In this position, the body forms a bridge, a suspension of flesh and bone held aloft by the pillars of the arms. The descent, or the eccentric phase, is where the controversy of the bench dip resides. As the trainee lowers their hips toward the floor by bending the elbows, the shoulder joint undergoes extension and inevitably a degree of internal rotation. The head of the humerus, the upper arm bone, tilts forward within the glenoid fossa, the shoulder socket. If the trainee descends too deeply, or if their posture is poor, rounded shoulders, this forward tilt can pinch the supraspinatus tendon and the subacromial bursa against the acromion process. This is the mechanism of shoulder impingement. Therefore, the depth of the dip must be strictly controlled. The beginner should lower themselves only until the elbows reach a 90-degree angle. Going ass to grass in a bench dip is not a batch downer. It is a prescription for rotator cuff tendinopathy. The range of motion must be determined by the flexibility of the anterior shoulder capsule, not by an arbitrary desire to touch the floor. Crucially, the proximity of the back to the bench is the single most important technical cue. A common error involves the hips drifting forward, away from the bench. This creates a long lever arm and places immense shearing force on the anterior shoulder. It turns the exercise into a shoulder wrecker. The goal is to keep the back skimming the edge of the bench, moving purely vertically, as if sliding down a wall. This keeps the load centered over the triceps and minimizes the strain on the glenohumeral joint. It requires a high degree of core engagement. The abdominals must be braced to prevent the rib cage from flaring and the spine from arching. The concentric phase, the push back up, is where the muscle is forged. The instruction is to drive the palms through the bench, extending the elbows until the arms are straight. However, the beginner must avoid locking out with a bone-on-bone snap. The lockout should be soft, a state of maximal muscular contraction where the weight is supported by the tension of the triceps.
Not the passive structure of the joint. This constant tension creates occlusion, restricting blood flow out of the muscle while allowing arterial blood in. This leads to the accumulation of metabolites, lactate, hydrogen ions, which creates metabolic stress, a key driver of muscle growth. The burn felt during a high-repetition set of bench dips is visceral and intense, a signal that the muscle is reaching its metabolic limit. Historically, the dip has been a staple of physical culture for centuries. In the mid-20th century, before the proliferation of cable machines and tricep pushdown stations, the dip was the primary mass builder for the back of the arm. It was championed by the pioneers of the iron game, who understood that moving the body through space required a level of neuromuscular coordination that moving a pin on a weight stack did not. In the modern era, the rise of street workout and calisthenics culture has revitalized the dip. You will see athletes in parks from New York to Moscow performing variations of this movement, using park benches and low walls. It represents the democratization of fitness, the idea that you do not need a membership to build powerful arms, you only need gravity and determination. For the beginner, the scalability of the bench dip is its greatest asset. It can be micro-loaded. If straight legs are too difficult, bending the knees to 90 degrees reduces the percentage of body weight lifted. If straight legs are too easy, the trainee can elevate their feet on a second bench or chair, effectively lifting the entirety of their body weight minus the weight of the lower legs. If that becomes too easy, a weight plate or a heavy backpack can be placed on the lap. This linear progression allows the exercise to grow with the trainee, remaining relevant from the first day of training well into the intermediate stages. We must also consider the role of the bench dip in correcting pushing imbalances. Many beginners are push-dominant in the horizontal plane, push-ups, bench press, but weak in the vertical plane, dips. The bench dip bridges this gap. It trains the depression of the scapula, the ability to pull the shoulder blades down using the lower trapezius and latissimus dorsi. This scapular depression is vital for shoulder health and posture. In a society plagued by shrugged shoulders due to stress and computer use, the act of actively pushing the shoulders down to lift the body is therapeutic.
It re-educates the scapular stabilizers. There is a psychological component to the dip as well. It is a vulnerable position. The arms are behind the body, the chest is open, and the face is forward. It requires trust in one's own structural integrity. The first few repetitions for a beginner can be shaky, as the nervous system struggles to coordinate the stabilization of the shoulder with the extension of the elbow. This shaking is not weakness leaving the body. It is the central nervous system mapping a new survival pattern. As the weeks progress, the shaking subsides, replaced by a piston-like smoothness. This neurological adaptation is as important as the muscular hypertrophy. However, the bench dip is not for everyone. Individuals with a history of anterior shoulder instability or existing impingement syndrome should approach with extreme caution or opt for alternative tricep exercises. But for the healthy beginner, it is a powerhouse. It teaches the concept of the mind-muscle connection in a unique way. Because the hands are fixed and the body moves, the trainee can shift their weight slightly to feel different parts of the tricep working.
Leaning slightly to one side can overload that arm. Shifting the weight back can recruit more of the medial head. It is a laboratory for self-experimentation. In the broader context of the top 10, the bench dip serves as the heavy artillery for the triceps. While the push-up, entry number 1, hits the triceps, it shares the load significantly with the chest. The bench dip isolates the triceps to a much higher degree while still allowing for heavy loading. It complements the biceps work, entry number 4, by addressing the antagonist muscle group, ensuring balanced arm development. A large bicep with a flat tricep looks incomplete. The dip provides the 3D depth to the arm. It is the exercise that fills out the sleeves. As we look to the future of fitness, where functional training and minimalist workouts are gaining traction, the bench dip will remain a cornerstone. It requires zero equipment, only a surface. It is the ultimate no-excuses exercise. Whether performed on a coffee table in a living room, a bench in a hotel gym, or a concrete ledge in an urban park, the mechanics remain the same. It is a universal language of effort. The burn is the same in every language. The bench dip stands as a testament to the fact that the most effective tools for building the human body are often the simplest.
Provided they are executed with the precision and respect for biomechanics that we have detailed here. It is the bridge between the novice and the athlete, a movement that demands you carry your own weight before you attempt to carry the world's.
6. Light wrist curls, the microarchitecture of grip and the aesthetics of vascularity. If the bench dip is the heavy artillery, the light wrist curl is the sniper's rifle, a precision instrument designed to target a specific, often neglected territory of the human anatomy, the forearm flexors. In the grand tapestry of physique development, the forearms are frequently treated as an afterthought, incidental beneficiaries of back and bicep training. This is a strategic error. The forearm is the visual ambassador of strength. It is the only muscle group consistently visible in a button-down shirt or a t-shirt. More importantly, the intricate lattice of muscles in the forearm dictates grip endurance, wrist stability, and the long-term health of the elbow joint. The light wrist curl is the definitive isolation movement for the anterior compartment of the forearm, a necessary ritual for the beginner seeking to build arms that are not just strong, but complete. To understand the wrist curl, one must first navigate the dense anatomy of the ventral forearm. We are dealing with a crowded compartment containing the flexor carpi radialis, the flexor carpi ulnaris, the palmaris longus, and the deep-seated flexor digitorum group. These muscles originate from the medial epicondyle of the humerus, the inner bump of the elbow, and insert into the metacarpals and phalanges of the hand. Their primary function is flexion, pulling the palm toward the inner arm and curling the fingers. The wrist curl isolates this function by stabilizing the elbow and shoulder, forcing the forearm muscles to work through their full range of motion without assistance. Why light? The emphasis on lightweight is not a concession to beginner weakness, it is a mandate for structural preservation. The wrist is a complex joint composed of 8 small carpal bones, bound together by a web of ligaments. The carpal tunnel, a narrow passageway housing the median nerve and 9 tendons, is highly susceptible to inflammation. Heavy, ego-driven wrist curls can cause compression in this tunnel and strain the delicate tendons, leading to chronic pain. High repetition training with light weights, think 5 to 10 pounds initially, flushes the area with blood, promoting synovial fluid exchange and tendon hypertrophy without exceeding the tensile strength of the connective tissue. The goal is to induce a pump, not to set a 1-rep max. The execution of the wrist curl is a study in subtlety.
The trainee kneels by a bench or sits on a chair, resting their forearm on a flat surface or their own thigh with the hand hanging off the edge, palm facing up. This support is critical. It eliminates the need for the shoulder or bicep to hold the arm in place, ensuring pure isolation. The movement begins with the wrist in full extension, the fingers loosely cradling the weight. This is the stretch position. From here, the trainee performs a dynamic rolling motion. First, the fingers curl, pulling the weight into the palm, recruiting the flexor digitorum. Then, the wrist flexes, curling the knuckles toward the inside of the elbow, recruiting the flexor carpi group. This 2-stage contraction ensures that the entire length of the flexor chain is activated. The roll down to the fingertips is the secret sauce often missed by casual gym goers. By allowing the dumbbell to roll down the fingers at the bottom of the rep, the trainee stretches the finger flexors under load. This eccentric loading is vital for building crushing strength. However, it must be controlled. Dropping the weight into the fingertips can jar the joints. It must be a smooth, fluid unraveling, followed by a deliberate recoiling. The tempo should be rhythmic but controlled. Squeeze, lower, unroll. Repeat. The physiological sensation of a high-rep set of wrist curls is unique. It is often described as a burning sensation that borders on painful. This is due to the dense fascia that wraps the forearm muscles. As the muscles engorge with blood, hyperemia, they press against this tight sheath, creating a high-pressure environment. For the beginner, this can be alarming, but it is the signal of efficacy. This pressure stimulates the fascia to stretch over time, creating more room for muscle growth. It also mimics the conditions of compartment syndrome in a safe, transient manner, forcing the body to adapt by improving vascularization, the creation of new capillaries. This is why forearm training leads to prominent vascularity, veiny arms, a highly coveted aesthetic trait.
Historically, the wrist curl was a non-negotiable staple of the golden era bodybuilders. Legends like Larry Scott and Arnold Schwarzenegger possessed forearms that rivaled the biceps of lesser men. They treated the forearm as a separate body part, deserving of its own day or at least a dedicated segment of the workout. In recent decades, with the rise of straps and lifting hooks,
Grip training fell out of favor. We are now seeing a resurgence, driven largely by the popularity of rock climbing, ninja warrior-style training, and arm wrestling. These disciplines have highlighted the fact that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and for the human body, that link is often the wrist. For the beginner, the wrist curl offers functional benefits that extend far beyond the gym. We live in the age of the keyboard and the smartphone. Repetitive strain injury, RSI, and carpal tunnel syndrome are epidemic. Paradoxically, strengthening the wrist flexors through a full range of motion can be preventative when done correctly and balanced with extensors. It conditions the tendons to handle stress and improves the endurance of the muscles that control the fingers. A beginner who performs wrist curls will find that their typing endurance improves, their gaming fatigue decreases, and their susceptibility to wrist pain from daily tasks diminishes. It is prehabilitation, rehab before the injury occurs. The wrist curl also plays a pivotal role in the progression of other lifts. As the beginner advances to heavier dumbbell curls, entry number 4, or farmer's carries, entry number 9, the grip will often fail before the target muscle. The bar will slip from the fingers. By proactively training the wrist flexors with curls, the beginner builds a safety buffer of grip strength. They ensure that their hands can hold what their back and legs can lift. It removes the bottleneck from their physical development. There are variations to consider. The behind-the-back barbell wrist curl popularized by Lee Haney allows for a tremendous peak contraction but can be awkward for beginners. The dumbbell version allows for unilateral training. Since most people are dominant in one hand, the non-dominant forearm is often significantly smaller and weaker. Using dumbbells ensures that the weak arm has to do its own work, correcting size and strength asymmetries. This symmetry is crucial for the aesthetic balance of the physique. Culturally, the forearm has always been a symbol of labor. The Popeye aesthetic represents working-class strength, the mechanic, the blacksmith, the farmer. These were men who built massive forearms not through curls but through decades of gripping hammers and plows. The wrist curl is the gym-goer's approximation of this manual labor. It is an homage to the working hand. In a digital world where manual labor is scarce,
The wrist curl provides the physical stimulus that our DNA expects, but our environment no longer provides. The future of forearm training is likely to become more integrated with technology. We are already seeing smart grip trainers and dynamometers that measure force output. However, the humble dumbbell wrist curl remains the gold standard for hypertrophy. It is simple, effective, and brutally honest. You cannot cheat a wrist curl. You either flex the wrist or you don't. In the context of our top 10 list, the light wrist curl, entry 6, is the necessary counterbalance to the heavy compound movements. It focuses on the distal end of the arm, ensuring that the power generated by the triceps, entry 5, and biceps, entry 4, can actually be applied to the world. It prepares the wrist for the stability requirements of the plank, entry 2, and the endurance demands of the resistance band pulls, entry 8. It is the detail work that separates an amateur physique from a polished one. It teaches the beginner that no muscle is too small to be trained, and that true strength extends to the very tips of the fingers. It is the final tightening of the bolts in the human machine.
7. Light reverse wrist curls, the antagonist equation and the preservation of the kinetic chain. If the standard wrist curl is the glamorous frontman of forearm training, the reverse wrist curl is the silent, indispensable bassist, often overlooked, yet without whom the entire structure collapses into dissonance. In our investigation into the architecture of the beginner's arm, we arrive at entry number 7, a movement that addresses the critical concept of structural balance. The light reverse wrist curl targets the wrist extensors, a group of muscles located on the dorsal top side of the forearm. These muscles, the extensor carpi radialis longus, the extensor carpi radialis brevis, and the extensor carpi ulnaris, are the physiological antagonists to the powerful flexors we trained in the previous entry. To neglect them is to invite pathology. To master them is to bulletproof the elbow and complete the aesthetic line of the arm. We must begin with the anatomy of neglect. In the modern human, and particularly the modern gym goer, the flexor muscles are chronically overused and hypertonic. We spend our lives gripping steering wheels, smartphones, barbells, coffee mugs. Every one of these actions involves flexion. Conversely, the extensors, responsible for opening the hand and cocking the wrist back, are chronically underused and lengthened. This creates a biomechanical asymmetry. The strong flexors pull on the wrist joint, creating a permanent state of tension that radiates up to the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. This is the genesis of lateral epicondylitis, colloquially known as tennis elbow, a debilitating condition that plagues millions who have never stepped foot on a tennis court. The reverse wrist curl is the antidote. It strengthens the weak side of the equation, restoring equilibrium to the joint and neutralizing the shear forces that tear at the connective tissue.
The mechanics of the reverse wrist curl are a study in mechanical disadvantage. Unlike the flexors, which are aided by the bulk of the forearm mass, the extensors are thinner, flatter sheets of muscle designed for fine motor control rather than brute force. This is why the light designation is not a suggestion, it is a biomechanical mandate. A beginner attempting to reverse curl the same weight they use for a standard curl will fail instantly, or worse, cheat by using the biceps to jerk the weight up.
The fulcrum, the wrist, is placed in a precarious position where the lever arm is working against the weakest muscle bellies. Therefore, the load must be humble, often starting with 2 to 5 pounds, or even just the weight of the hand itself for a deconditioned novice. The execution requires a forensic attention to form. The trainee sits, forearms supported on the thigh or a bench, exactly as with the standard curl, but this time with the palm facing the floor, pronated. The hand hangs off the edge. The movement begins with the wrist fully flexed downward, stretching the skin across the top of the wrist. From this depth, the trainee must isolate the extensors to lift the back of the hand toward the ceiling. The range of motion is naturally shorter than flexion. The wrist bones hit a hard stop against the radius much sooner. The crucial moment is the top of the movement, the peak contraction. Here, the trainee must pause for a full second. It is in this pause that the neurological connection is forged. Most beginners have sensory amnesia in their extensors. They cannot feel them working. The pause forces the brain to acknowledge and recruit these dormant motor units. Visually, the reverse wrist curl targets the extensor carpi radialis longus, a muscle that runs along the outer edge of the forearm. When developed, this muscle creates the coveted sweep or curve that connects the elbow to the wrist, giving the forearm a thick, three-dimensional appearance. Without it, the forearm looks flat and two-dimensional from the side. For the bodybuilder or aesthetic-minded beginner, the reverse wrist curl is the secret to the Popeye silhouette. It fills in the blank space on the canvas of the arm. But the implications go far beyond vanity. We must discuss the concept of co-contraction and grip stability. A strong grip is not just about squeezing, flexion. It is about stabilizing the wrist so the fingers can squeeze effectively. Try to make a tight fist with your wrist bent completely forward, flexed. It is impossible. The grip is weak. Now cock your wrist back slightly, extension, and squeeze. The grip is powerful. This is because the extensors act as stabilizers, holding the wrist in the optimal position for the flexors to exert maximum force. Therefore, by training the extensors with reverse curls, the beginner is indirectly increasing their crushing grip strength. The reverse wrist curl is the scaffolding that allows the heavy lifting to occur.
The cultural history of the reverse wrist curl is tied to the Iron Age of physical therapy and the niche world of arm wrestling. Arm wrestlers have long understood that back pressure, the ability to pull the opponent's hand open, is often the deciding factor in a match. They train the extensors with fanatical devotion. In the general fitness population, however, the exercise fell out of favor during the machine era of the 1980s and 90s, as it requires patience and yields slow visual returns compared to the bicep curl. It is a working-class exercise, unglamorous and grueling. The burn generated by a set of 20 reverse wrist curls is distinct. It is a hot, searing sensation that feels localized and acidic. This is due to the small size of the muscle compartment, which fills rapidly with lactate. In the context of the digital age, the reverse wrist curl has gained a new urgency. We are facing an epidemic of mouse arm and gamer's thumb. The claw-like grip used to hold a mouse or a game controller places the extensors in a state of static, low-level tension that restricts blood flow and causes fibrotic tissue changes. The dynamic motion of the reverse wrist curl acts as a pump, flushing fresh, oxygenated blood into these starved tissues and breaking up adhesions. It is quite literally movement as medicine. For the beginner who spends 8 hours a day at a keyboard, this exercise is non-negotiable. It is the maintenance required to keep the human machine interfacing with the digital world. Variations of the movement allow for progression. The dumbbell reverse curl allows for unilateral correction, ensuring the dominant hand doesn't compensate for the weaker one. The barbell reverse curl, standing, is a compound variation that involves the biceps and brachialis, but for pure forearm isolation, the supported wrist curl is superior. We must also mention the thick bar variant. Using a thicker handle or wrapping a towel around the dumbbell forces the hand open, pre-stretching the extensors and increasing the difficulty exponentially. This is an advanced tactic, but one the beginner can aspire to. The philosophical implication of entry number 7 is the importance of the shadow side. In every system, there is a visible component and a hidden support structure. The biceps and flexors are the visible, the triceps and extensors are the support. A beginner who focuses only on what they can see in the mirror is building a facade.
The reverse wrist curl teaches the discipline of training the back of the body, the parts that don't get the glory but do the work. It is a lesson in structural integrity.
Ultimately, the light reverse wrist curl is the insurance policy of the arm. It protects the elbow from the trauma of heavy lifting. It balances the forces across the wrist joint. It creates a forearm that looks powerful from every angle. It demands humility, as the weights used will be humbling, but it rewards the trainee with longevity. It ensures that the beginner's journey does not end in a physical therapist's office with a diagnosis of epicondylitis, but continues forward toward mastery and strength. It is the small hinge that swings the big door of potential.
8. Light resistance band pulls, the elastic revolution and the physics of endurance. We now transition from the iron of gravity to the latex of elasticity. Entry number 8, light resistance band pulls, marks a paradigm shift in our investigation. Until this point, every exercise listed has relied on the constant force of gravity acting upon a mass. Resistance bands introduce the beginner to variable resistance, a physics concept governed by Hooke's law, F equals kx, which states that the force needed to extend a spring is proportional to the distance it is extended. In lay terms, the further you pull, the harder it gets. This simple property fundamentally alters the stimulus applied to the arm muscles, creating a unique environment for building endurance, connective tissue resilience, and neuromuscular control. The band pull is a versatile category, but for the beginner seeking effective arm exercises, we are specifically analyzing the band pull apart and the band tricep press down bicep curl complex. These movements are designed to flood the muscles with blood without the compressive joint forces associated with heavy iron. They are the ultimate tool for volume accumulation, the ability to perform hundreds of repetitions to build the capillary density required to support larger muscle growth in the future. Let us dissect the band pull apart. The trainee holds a light resistance band in front of them with straight arms and pulls it apart until the band touches the chest. While primarily a rear delt and upper back exercise, the isometric demand on the triceps to keep the arms straight and the grip to hold the tension is immense over high repetitions. It is an arm exercise in the sense that it integrates the arm into the shoulder girdle. It teaches the arm to act as a lever that transmits force from the back. For a beginner with slumped posture, this movement is corrective gold. It retracts the scapulae, opening the chest and placing the humerus in a centered position where the biceps and triceps can function optimally. You cannot build big arms on a collapsed structure. The band pull apart fixes the foundation. However, the band tricep press down is where the direct arm training shines. The trainee loops the band over a high anchor, a pull-up bar, a door frame, and performs a tricep extension. The magic of the band lies in the ascending strength curve. In a dumbbell movement, the mechanical advantage changes,
often making the weight easier at the top. With a band, the resistance peaks exactly when the muscle is fully contracted, the lockout. This forces the tricep to generate maximum tension in its shortest position, a stimulus that is difficult to replicate with free weights. This peak contraction creates a profound occlusion effect, trapping lactate in the muscle and triggering a massive release of local growth factors. For the beginner, the term endurance in this entry is critical. We are not talking about cardiovascular endurance, we are talking about local muscular endurance. The arm muscles are composed of a mix of type 1, slow twitch, and type 2, fast twitch fibers. Heavy weights hit the type 2 fibers. High repetition band work targets the type 1 fibers. These fibers are stubborn. They require long durations of tension to fatigue. A set of 50 band pull-aparts or press-downs takes 45 to 60 seconds. This extended time under tension builds the metabolic machinery of the muscle cells, the mitochondria and capillaries. It builds the gas tank of the arms. A beginner who skips this step will find their arms fatiguing quickly during heavier lifts, limiting their overall volume. The history of resistance bands in strength training is a fascinating journey from the rehabilitation clinic to the powerlifting platform. Originally used by physical therapists to rehab atrophied muscles in a low-impact manner, bands were weaponized in the late 20th century by powerlifting gurus like Louis Simmons of Westside Barbell. Simmons realized that adding bands to lifts or using them for high-rep restoration workouts dramatically improved tendon strength and recovery rates. He championed the idea that high-volume, low-load band work thickens the tendon's ligaments. For the beginner, this is vital. Muscles grow faster than tendons. If a beginner's muscle strength outpaces their tendon strength, injury occurs. Band pulls allow the connective tissue to catch up, thickening the tendons of the elbow and shoulder to handle future loads. The overspeed eccentric is another phenomenon unique to bands. When you lower a dumbbell, gravity pulls it down at a constant rate. When you lower a stretched band, it actively snaps back, pulling your arm down faster than gravity would. The muscles must react reflexively to decelerate this force. This trains the nervous system to absorb force, a quality known as reactive ability. While a beginner uses light bands,
this effect is still present. It teaches the arms to be athletic and responsive, not just stiff and slow. The portability and accessibility of the band cannot be overstated. In an era where friction prevents many from exercising, the drive to the gym, the cost of equipment, the band removes all barriers. A band fits in a pocket. It turns a park tree, a hotel doorknob, or a playground pole into a cable machine. This accessibility fosters consistency, and consistency is the primary driver of beginner progress. The light resistance band pull can be done daily. In fact, many coaches recommend doing 100 band pull-aparts every single day as prehab to offset the effects of sitting. This frequency is impossible with heavy weights, but with bands, the restorative nature of the blood flow aids recovery rather than hindering it. We must also explore the sensory feedback of the band. Because the tension increases smoothly, there is no jolt on the joints. This makes it the perfect warm-up tool. Before touching a weight, a beginner should perform band pulls to lubricate the elbow joints with synovial fluid. It warms the oil in the engine before the race begins. But as a standalone exercise, it is equally potent. The pump achieved from a high-rep band set is distinct. The arms feel swollen and tight, providing immediate positive reinforcement to the trainee. Technically, the beginner must watch for the slack. A common error is allowing the band to go completely loose at the bottom of the movement. This destroys the efficacy of the set. The golden rule of band training is maintain tension. Even at the start of the rep, the band should be taut. The muscle should never rest. This continuous tension creates a hypoxic environment, lack of oxygen in the muscle, which is a powerful signal for adaptation. The beginner learns to fight through the burn, building mental fortitude alongside physical endurance. The future of fitness is trending toward longevity and sustainability. The days of no pain, no gain are being replaced by train smarter, last longer. Resistance bands are at the forefront of this movement. They offer a way to train the arms with high intensity but low joint stress. For the aging population or the beginner who wants to be training in their 70s, the band is a lifelong companion. It is the tool that bridges the gap between rehabilitation and performance. In conclusion,
Entry number 8 is not just an exercise, it is a philosophy of resilience. Light resistance band pulls teach the beginner that strength is not just about overcoming gravity once with a heavy load, it is about enduring tension over time. It builds the connective tissue armor that protects the joints. It corrects the postural collapses of modern life. It creates a working capacity in the arms that allows for harder, heavier training in the future. It is the elastic foundation of a steel physique. The band snaps back, and in resisting that snap, the beginner learns to stand their ground.
9. Light farmer's carry, the primal locomotion and the integrity of the vertical column. We arrive now at the 9th entry, a movement so deceptively simple that it is often dismissed by the uneducated observer as mere manual labor, yet so biomechanically profound that it is regarded by elite strength coaches as the single most functional exercise in the human repertoire. The light farmer's carry is the act of picking up heavy objects and walking with them. It is the evolutionary blueprint of the human species. Before we pressed bar nails or curled dumbbells, we carried carcasses, water, children, and building materials across uneven terrain. This exercise does not isolate a muscle, it integrates the entire organism. It is the ultimate test of structural integrity, challenging the beginner to maintain a rigid vertical column against the crushing forces of gravity and the dynamic instability of locomotion. While categorized here as an arm exercise due to the immense demand it places on the grip and the shoulder girdle, it is, in reality, a full-body symphony of tension, posture, and will. The anatomical demand of the farmer's carry begins naturally at the hand. Unlike the static hold of a gripper or the rhythmic contraction of a curl, the farmer's carry demands endurance grip. The fingers must remain hooked around the dumbbell handles for extended durations, 30 seconds, a minute, perhaps 2. This recruits the flexor digitorum profundus and superficialis in an isometric contraction that is relentless. The capillaries in the forearm are compressed, creating a hypoxic environment that triggers rapid adaptation. For the beginner, this teaches the hand to be an unyielding hook. But the force does not stop at the wrist, it travels up the kinetic chain. The rotator cuff muscles must fire synchronically to keep the head of the humerus centered in the socket, preventing the arms from being ripped downward by the weight. This distraction force, the weight trying to pull the arm out of the socket, is arguably the best way to strengthen the shoulder capsule. It stimulates the ligaments to thicken and the stabilizer muscles to engage reflexively. However, the defining feature of the farmer's carry is its impact on posture. We live in a society of the internal rotation, hunched over desks, phones, and steering wheels. The shoulders roll forward, the upper back rounds, and the head juts out. The farmer's carry, when executed correctly,
acts as a forcible correction to this modern malaise. To carry weight efficiently, the body naturally seeks its strongest alignment. The trainee must retract the shoulder blades, puff out the chest, thoracic extension, and stack the rib cage over the pelvis. The upper trapezius muscles are often demonized as being tight, but in the carry, they perform their true function, elevating and stabilizing the shoulder girdle against a downward load. The burn felt in the traps during a long carry is not injury. It is the feeling of atrophied postural muscles finally waking up to do their job. The light designation in this entry is a strategic safety valve. In the world of strongman competitions, athletes carry hundreds of pounds per hand. For the beginner, however, the goal is not maximal load, but maximal quality of movement. A lightweight, perhaps 20 to 30 pounds per hand, allows the novice to focus on the gait cycle. Walking is a series of controlled falls. When we add load, we amplify the instability of being on one leg. Every step in a farmer's carry is a single leg stance exercise. The gluteus medius, side hip muscle, must fire aggressively to prevent the hip from dropping. The core, specifically the quadratus lumborum in the obliques, must brace to prevent the spine from buckling sideways. Thus, the arms become the transmission lines for a global stability challenge. If the core is soft, the arms cannot hold the weight effectively. The beginner learns that arm strength is useless without a stable trunk. We must also explore the suitcase carry variation, which is particularly relevant for beginners. This involves holding a weight in only one hand. This creates an enormous antilateral flexion moment. The weight tries to bend the spine sideways. The trainee must use their obliques to stay upright. This is one of the most effective core exercises in existence, yet it is performed with a dumbbell in hand, masquerading as an arm exercise. It teaches the arm to work independently, correcting the asymmetries we discussed in earlier entries. It forces the non-working arm to act as a counterbalance, often held out for stability, engaging the deltoid isometrically. The historical context of the carry is rooted in the very survival of our species, but its reemergence in modern fitness is largely credited to coaches like Dan John, who famously stated that the carry is the game changer for athletic performance. In the mid-20th century,
Gym culture shifted toward machines and seated exercises, movements that removed the stability requirement. The farmer's carry brings us back to reality. It is functional in the truest sense of the word. It directly transfers to the act of carrying groceries, luggage, or a tired child. It is real-world strength. For the beginner, the psychological boost of being able to physically move a load from point A to point B is significant. It is a tangible measurement of work capacity. The physiological response to the farmer's carry is systemic because it utilizes so much muscle mass: calves, hamstrings, glutes, core, back, traps, arms, grip. It places a huge demand on the cardiovascular system. The heart rate spikes. The body consumes oxygen at a rapid rate. It is a metabolic conditioner disguised as a strength move. For the beginner who wants to lose fat while building arm muscle, the carry is a 2-for-1 deal. It builds the forearms of a blacksmith while burning calories like a sprinter. The metabolic demand also triggers a hormonal cascade, releasing testosterone and growth hormone that aids in systemic recovery and growth. Technique is paramount. The most common error is the forward head posture. As the traps fatigue, the trainee often cranes their neck forward. This must be corrected. The cue is pack the neck or make a double chin. The spine must remain long, the crown of the head reaching for the sky. Another error is the waddle. Beginners often take short, choppy steps or wide lateral steps to compensate for the weight. The goal is to walk normally, heel to toe, smooth, rhythmic strides. The weight should move in a straight line, not bounce up and down. This smoothness requires the arms to act as shock absorbers, dampening the oscillation of the gait. The farmer's carry also serves as a diagnostic tool for grip failure. In many pulling exercises, the grip fails before the back muscles. The carry isolates this variable. By training the carry, the beginner ensures that their hands are never the limiting factor in their development. It builds crushing endurance. There is a distinct difference between being able to squeeze a gripper once and being able to hold a heavy handle for 2 minutes while your lungs are burning and your traps are screaming. This builds mental callousness, the grit required to push through discomfort. Future trends in fitness indicate a move away from aesthetic isolation toward capability.
The question is shifting from how big are your arms to what can you do with them? The farmer's carry answers the second question definitively. We are seeing the rise of rucking, walking with a loaded backpack, and obstacle course racing, both of which rely heavily on the ability to carry load over distance. The farmer's carry is the gym-based preparation for this lifestyle. It prepares the connective tissues of the feet and ankles, the compressive tolerance of the knees, and the tensile strength of the arms. In the grand architecture of the top 10 list, the farmer's carry is the great integrator. It takes the isolated strength built by the curls, entry number 4, and the dips, entry number 5, and the stability of the plank, entry number 2, and demands that they all work together in a dynamic, chaotic environment. It proves that the body is one piece. You cannot have strong arms on a weak body. The farmer's carry exposes every leak in the system and over time seals them. It creates a physique that looks powerful because it is powerful. It is the walk of the warrior, the laborer, and the athlete, distilled into a single, grueling, beautiful lap around the gym floor.
10. Forearm stretches, the architecture of recovery and the silence after the storm. We conclude our dossier not with a bang, but with a necessary exhale. Entry number 10, forearm stretches, is the counterbalance to the violence of growth. In the fervor of beginner training, the focus is almost exclusively on contraction, tension, and exertion, the yang of physical cultivation. However, physiology dictates that tissue adaptation occurs not during the work, but during the recovery. Without a dedicated protocol to restore tissue length, hydrate the fascia, and calm the nervous system, the beginner's journey will inevitably be cut short by the twin specters of tendinitis and entrapment neuropathy. Forearm stretches are not merely a cooldown, they are the architectural maintenance required to keep the machine running. They represent the yin, the restoration of fluidity to a system that has been calcified by effort. To understand the necessity of stretching, we must look at the microscopic structure of the muscle tendon unit. The muscles of the forearm are encased in fascia, a collagenous web that wraps every fiber, bundle, and muscle belly.
Under the stress of training and the repetitive strain of modern life, this fascia can become dehydrated and matted, effectively shrink-wrapping the muscle. This restricts blood flow, limits range of motion, and compresses the nerves passing through the arm. The forearm is particularly susceptible because of the high density of muscles in a small volume. The pump that feels so good during training can become a compartment syndrome-like pressure if the tissue is never elongated. Stretching realigns the collagen fibers along the lines of stress, preventing the formation of chaotic scar tissue. The wrist flexor stretch is the primary maneuver in this arsenal. The anatomy here involves the muscles that curl the palm inward. To stretch them, we must do the opposite, extend the wrist and elbow. The trainee extends their arm forward, palm facing up, and uses the opposite hand to gently pull the fingers back toward the floor. The sensation should be a pleasant tension running from the base of the palm, through the inner wrist, and up to the medial epicondyle, the funny bone. This stretch targets the flexor carpi radialis and ulnaris, but the nuance lies in the fingers. By pulling the fingers back, not just the palm, we engage the flexor digitoris muscles.
Stretching the tendons that run through the carpal tunnel. This is crucial for preventing carpal tunnel syndrome, a condition where the median nerve is compressed by inflamed tendons. For the modern beginner, whose hands are perpetually clawed around a mouse or phone, this stretch is the antidote to digital deformation. Conversely, the wrist extensor stretch targets the top of the forearm. The arm is extended, palm facing down, and the hand is pulled downward into flexion. This stretches the muscles responsible for tennis elbow. These muscles are often weaker and more fibrotic. The stretch here feels different, tighter, perhaps sharper. It opens up the dorsal compartment of the wrist, improving the mobility required for exercises like the front squat or the push-up, entry number 1. Without adequate wrist flexion, a beginner cannot perform a push-up without pain. The joint jams before the movement is complete. Thus, stretching is a prerequisite for performance. We must also exploit the prayer stretch and its inverse. Placing the palms together in front of the chest and lowering the hands while keeping the heels of the palms touching creates a bilateral stretch that opens the carpal tunnel. It is a moment of symmetry. Reversing this, placing the backs of the hands together, stretches the extensors. These movements, borrowed from yoga and physical therapy, emphasize the interconnectedness of the arm lines. They remind a beginner that the left and right sides must be balanced. The physiology of stretching involves the concept of viscoelasticity. Tendons and fascia are viscoelastic. They have properties of both a fluid and a solid. When stretched slowly and held, they exhibit creep, a gradual elongation of the tissue. They also exhibit hysteresis, energy loss. This means that a stretched muscle is less stiff and more pliable. For a beginner, this pliability is safety. A stiff muscle tears under sudden load, a pliable muscle absorbs it. Furthermore, static stretching activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode. After the high adrenaline stress of farmers' carries and dips, the body needs a signal to downregulate. Slow, rhythmic breathing combined with static stretching provides the signal, lowering cortisol levels and kickstarting the recovery process. There is a neurological component known as the Golgi tendon organ, GTO. Located in the tendons, these sensors detect tension. If tension is too high, they trigger a reflex to relax the muscle, autogenic inhibition. By holding a stretch for 30 seconds or more, the beginner overcomes the initial stretch reflex and allows the GTO to communicate to the spinal cord that it is safe to lengthen the muscle. This resetting of the resting muscle length is vital for posture. If the forearm flexors are chronically short, the wrist sits in a flexed position, the elbow stays slightly bent, and the shoulder rolls forward. Stretching restores the neutral anatomical position. The cultural relevance of forearm stretching has exploded in the era of esports and remote work. We are seeing a generation of industrial athletes who sit at keyboards for 12 hours a day. The rates of repetitive strain injury, RSI, are skyrocketing. In this context, the forearm stretch ceases to be just an exercise component and becomes a survival tool. It is the toothbrushing of the musculoskeletal system, a daily hygiene practice required to prevent decay. Forward-thinking corporate wellness programs now include mandatory stretching breaks. The beginner who adopts these stretches is effectively inoculating themselves against the most common occupational hazards of the 21st century. We must also address the fascial lines or anatomy trains. The fascia of the forearm does not end at the elbow. It connects to the biceps fascia, which connects to the pectorals, which connects to the neck. A tight forearm can paradoxically cause neck pain. By stretching the forearm, the beginner is releasing tension that may be manifesting elsewhere in the chain. This holistic view of the body transforms the stretch from a local isolation move into a systemic release. The sensation of a deep forearm stretch can often be felt all the way up to the collarbone, revealing the tightness of the entire front line of the arm. In the future of training, recovery modalities are predicted to become as prominent as the training itself. We are already seeing the rise of percussive therapy guns and compression sleeves. However, these are external tools. Stretching is internal. It requires the trainee to feel their own body, to listen to the feedback of the tissue. It fosters interoception, the sense of the internal state of the body. A beginner who stretches learns to identify the difference between good pain, stretch tension, and bad pain, injury. This body awareness is the most valuable skill a novice can cultivate. Finally,
Entry number 10 serves as the philosophical bookend to the top 10 list. We began with the knee push-up, an act of overcoming gravity. We end with the forearm stretch, an act of yielding to physiology. The cycle of training is a cycle of destruction and reconstruction. The weights break us down. The recovery builds us up. The forearm stretch honors the tissue that has done the work. It is a moment of gratitude for the hands that grip, the wrists that stabilize, and the arms that lift.
It ensures that the beginner can return to the gym tomorrow and the day after and for years to come. It is the practice that turns a resolution into a lifestyle. It is the silence that allows the music of strength to be heard.